Hi, this is CJ with CJatCompRCC.com. So one of these rods is going to be connecting across here, and that's going to use the two longer ones. And these are nice the way they're kind of narrowed in there. I could always paint those black, and that might be even more discreet. So. Okay, that does not use the longer ones. That screws on from behind. Yes, it does. Oh, that's going to be fun to get at. Now, when you're using the really short little ball sockets like these, be careful about screwing the grub screw too far. You give it a little too much, and all of a sudden the ball socket will feel tight because you're actually pushing the plastic through. And it's not a big deal. You can just back off of the grub screw, and it should return to its normal looseness. But try to avoid doing that, because if you push it too far, it might not ever quite be the same again. It might always be a little tight if you bubble the plastic out. I'm just finger snugging these because who knows how many times I'm going to take them on and off. Okay, it's a little long at the base. Actually, it's a little short. If you can see the pumpkin is a little to one side. You can also look straight down the suspension. This should be a little more off. Now, this is the issue with Panhards. As I've said, you get that little bit of lateral motion in the suspension, but it articulates far better. This is definitely the best way to do front suspension. That might be too much. I'll go into this bag and see what I've got. That has been trimmed from the larger size, and it is somewhere in between those two. One of those should be what I need, or I'll take the next size up and trim down a little bit. I'm going to start with this size. Okay, that was right. See, I think what I was doing is I was looking at this right here as the center, and it's not. The drive shaft really is. The center of the pumpkin is kind of right about here. So where I'm looking now is straight down the center, the relationship between these two bolts and the frame, and that seems to line right up. And this seems to be in a good position too. it's almost got less lateral play than it originally had. Now it's time to get the servo in place. And I may actually have to disassemble some of this to do that. As usual, nothing is as simple as it looks. The servo is going to be mounted with the drive at the rear, toward the rear of the car, like this. And the linkage arm is going to be pointing this way down the servo. Now, that's not a problem in itself, but the linkage is going to be bolted onto there, so any bolt or whatever that I'm going to have on the opposite side is going to need to be put on before I screw that in place, otherwise I won't be able to get to it. And that also may necessitate that I replace this bar, or I think for the sake of clearance, I'm going to have to put that in from below. I think putting the crossbar back on, at least one linkage is going to help, so I can see what I'm doing as far as whether or not this is being oriented properly. Now, the reason I'm being so kind of touchy about getting this right is because, in theory, I can adjust for any inaccuracy with trim. The problem with doing that is that it's going to limit the steering throw from left to right, so I want this to be right about dead center without having to make any changes in trim. Subtle trim adjustment, fine. I got no problem with, putting it off a degree or two. I just don't want to make a major compensation. As you can see, a lot of trial and error, a lot of tinkering. It's worth it. Take the time. Okay, yeah, this is a Traxxas piece, not an RC4x4, and you can tell by the type of ball cup, or actually the ball itself is a little different. Yeah, if you let me show you the difference. The Traxxas has a nice flat base here. The bases on the RC4x4 are a little shorter, or a little not as big in diameter, but there's one on both sides, whereas the Traxxas piece, there's no base, just a little bit of a rim. And it seems like the RC4x4s allow for a little more articulation. Maybe I needed a spacer on there, I'm not sure, but it just seemed like I wasn't getting the same amount of angle. See, there's already a spacer down here which lifts this, and if I put a spacer up top in between the servo arm and the connecting rod, that will help reduce the overall angle and thus make binding not a problem. That's why I really wish they'd provided a couple of more of the little dog leg parts. I'm gonna go ahead and pause for a minute, and I'm gonna paw around through my various spare parts and see what I've got. Okay, I think I found a solution. If you watch the earlier build videos, you know that I did use some RC4x4 parts, these eye screws and some of the suspension, but I also used the standard parts with the ball, whatever you want to call these, from Traxxas. Okay, and this was something I discovered during the build process when I was tinkering around trying to get the linkages correct. The Traxxas linkages that are like this, if you snap the balls out of them, they fit perfectly into the axial components. Now the axials use these, which are plastic, and I wanted to use metal wherever possible, especially for something that you're going to be clamping with a bolt. So I went ahead and replaced those throughout the suspension linkages with the Traxxas balls. Now these two arms are dog-legged, and if I do a linkage like this where they are in opposite directions, that may make the steering work a little better. Between the two of them, one is a little longer than this short one and a little shorter than this long one, so the two of them together might be just the right size, and they definitely are going to not bind because of that little bit of an angle that's built into them. So I'm going to go ahead and try those out. So if you can see, this would be up. We have a more or less horizontal cup on this side and a more or less horizontal cup at that side. Okay, well, the only way to be sure is to bolt this all up. And that is on the long side. I think the best thing to do at this point is go ahead and get this servo anchored down.